Alright, welcome back guys. So in the last video we did quite a few things. One of the important things was that we implemented our registration logic on our front end. So how we did that is on our register page, we now have a form which we can fill out with our first name, last name, email, and password. And now we can click on this register button. So then what happens when we click on that register button, if I open up my client, source features user, so inside of here, we have this register action creator, and then we use this create async thunk. That way we can have asynchronous actions, or suppose asynchronous dispatches happening. And then what this thing does for us is it makes this API request, and here we have a relative route. So /API users register. Now because in the last video we did this setup proxy, so on our Express server, whenever we make a relative request while we're running our React development server with that create React app, so that's what it sets up for us. So that's going to be running on localhost 3000, but now when we make relative requests like this, instead of having this then go to localhost 3000, then this route, now it's going to look like it's coming from localhost 5000 because of this proxy we set up. So that's what helped us get around the CORS issue, so the cross-origin resource sharing issues, when we're doing things in development, because of course I want to just be running my development server with React, which would be running on localhost 3000, instead of having to do a production build and then be serving it with Express. So this way I can have things working both in development and in production. So that's the reason why we did this whole setting up of the proxy, so that we can get around the CORS issues. Now this will also help us with cookies, so that's another thing we're going to see, because cookies by default get sent automatically in the request when the origins are the same. However, when the origins are different, then cookies don't get sent along. So this proxy is also going to help us with that, because we're going to want cookies going back and forth between our React client and our Express server. Now in production, because Express is going to be serving our React client, this will be no problem. But in development, this is another reason why we need this proxy, and it makes things a lot easier for us because now the cookies will be getting sent back and forth without us having to worry. So now anyway, back to this action creator. So this will send this request off, and then Express has a route handler for this, which is this one right here. So we're going to hit this. We're going to receive all of these values, and then we're going to JSON stringify them, send them to our Django backend API. So that's this right here. And then we just mirror back the response to our React client. So whatever the status code is, whatever the data was, we just send that back. And then back on our client, we receive that data. We see the status code. And if it's a 201, this was successful. We'll just send the data as a payload. Otherwise, we're going to do this thunk API.reject with value, which then is going to send a rejected dispatch type. So remember, when we're using this create async thunk, we have a pending, fulfilled, and rejected case that can all be hit. So pending's when the request is being made, we just set loading to true so we can see a loader. And then we have, if it's fulfilled, we'll just set this registered to be true. So that's this right here. And then this will redirect us to the login page. And then we also have the rejected case where all we're going to do is set loading to false. Now, it took quite a bit to get everything set up in terms of the register route handler, also this asynchronous action creator, and then setting up this extra reducer. So all of this took quite a bit because I had to explain a lot of things in the last video, but the rest of these should fly along much more quickly. So let's get right into it. Because right now, what we have is this registration page, but we also need a way to log in. So that would probably be a good next step. Also maybe adding a tiny bit to this homepage might be okay. So I'll perhaps do that first. And also, by the way, I have 3 terminals running. So I have one for my Django backend API, I have one for my Express server, and I have one for my React development server. So I have all of these, so make sure you also have those running as well. All right, so first thing I will do is open up my containers homepage and just add a tiny bit to this. So instead of homepage, I'll just say auth site, and I'll have a little paragraph that says, welcome to auth site. Very nice and simple. And maybe I'll have a little bit of margin between these things. So margin bottom 5. There we go. A slightly better homepage, I suppose. All right, so next thing, let's do our login page because we need a way to log in now. Now this login page, it's going to be quite similar to this register page. So to help me out, I'm just going to open up this register page. So we're going to need things like the form data for the use state because we're going to have an email and password to log in. We're also going to destructure the email password from the form data. We're going to have an onChange handler and onSubmit handler. So a lot of these things will be quite similar. So I'm just going to grab these things, copy them, whip on over to my login page, and then just paste them right over here. And then maybe this use effect I could place below here, let's say. And then as for my initial state, I'm not going to have these two fields. And then I won't be destructuring these two fields from here either. And then this onSubmit, I'm going to remove this dispatch because we're going to have a different dispatch. It's going to be one for logging in. So far, so good. And then I'm going to go to this return because here we're returning some JSX. I'm just going to grab everything that's between these layout tags. So all of this in here. I'm going to copy it, go back into here, and just paste in here. All right, so now let's tweak this so that it fits with our login page. So here we have register for an account. Here I'll just say log into your account. Maybe I'll use lower cases, doesn't matter too much. And then here our forms, gonna have an onSubmit, which is gonna do our login, so that's all good. Here we have a first name inside of this form group. I do not want that, so I will remove it. Same thing with this last name form group. I'll remove that as well. And then I'm also not going to need this margin top 3 styling because this is the first form group. So now we have email, password, and then here we have register. Instead, I'm going to have the text login. So just like that, if I now go back, looks like, oh yeah, I have to bring in use state and loading, of course. So let's fix those errors. So use state is coming from React, and then loading is a piece of state in Redux, so in our Redux store, so I'm gonna have to bring in use selector. And then right over here, I can bring in loading. So I'll destructure loading, and then I'll do use selector, and then state.user. All right, so now with that, if I go to login, now we have a nice login page. So nice and easy so far. So like I said, this is going to go much more quickly. So now the next thing we have to do is actually create an action creator for logging in. But then before we do that, we're also going to need a route handler on Express that's going to allow us to log in the first place. So what deems us to even be logged in? So we are logged in when we have access to an access token, because with an access token, we can hit those authorized routes. So for instance, the one to retrieve our user and then display that data in the dashboard. And then in order to actually utilize the access token, we're going to be storing it in a cookie with the httpOnly flag. So that way, only on Express can you parse the value of that access token and then use it to make authorized requests on Django. So that's the way that works. So right now, I'm just going to close up these files, open up our features user, and then I'm also going to open up this routes auth and create a file in here called login.js. Because these are two areas where we're going to have to work right now. So first thing I'm going to do is const express is require express. Then const router is equal to express.router. And then after this, going to have module.exports equals router. And then between here, I'm going to make my route handler. So router.post, because this is going to be a post request, and it's going to be to API/users/login. Then I'm going to have my callback. So I'm going to have rec and res. And then between here, I'm going to be making an API request to my Django backend API. And that's going to be to that token/route. So if I open up my backend auth site URLs, here I have this API/token/route. And this is going to get me an access and refresh token, which then I can store inside of a cookie. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And then also one thing before I actually go ahead and do this. So this has to do with cookies. So in case if you don't know, how do we set cookies in the first place? So you can do it in two ways. So you can either do it directly on the browser. So in that case, you would just be using the DOM. Or you can do it through a fetch. So through an AJAX request of some kind. And then in the response, if you get back a set cookie header, then that's going to tell the browser, hey, we need to set this cookie. And then you also have to send the actual cookie along with that set cookie header. That way the browser knows what to set. So that's the way it works. So when the browser sees a set cookie header in a response, then it's going to go ahead and set that cookie. So those are the two ways that you can set cookies in the browser. So because I'm going to be making an asynchronous request here to my Django backend API, I'm also going to add in the async keyword here because I'm going to be doing an await inside of here because I'm going to be using the async await syntax. Then I'm also going to open up this register because I also want to copy this import for fetch because that's another thing I'm going to need. So I'm just going to go ahead and paste that up here. And now let's go ahead and continue with this logic. So I'm going to destructure two things from the rec.body, and that's going to be the two things I need to log in. So email and password. Next, I'm going to have a try catch. And then in here, I'm going to have const response is await. And again, because we already have something called res here, I have to call this something else. So I can call this, say, API res. So for API response, you can even call it response if you want. I'll do maybe API response like this. So I'm going to have await fetch. Then with backticks, I'm going to bring in the API URL, which is going to be coming from my process.env. Because remember, in our environment variables, we set this up here. This is our localhost 8000. Then it's going to be /API/token/ with that trailing slash. So make sure you don't omit it. And then we're going to have a method of post. And then for my headers, I'm going to have an accept header. So application JSON. I'm going to have a content type, which is also application JSON. Because we're going to be sending some JSON data, which is going to be a body, which I'm going to go ahead and define right here. So const body is JSON stringify, email, and password is what we want to JSON stringify and pass that along here. Then the next thing I'm going to do is see whether this was successful. So if API response.status is 200, then I know that this was successful. And then the reason why I want to see if it was successful is because if it was successful, then I'm going to go ahead and set these cookies. So I'm also going to do up here const data is await API res.json just to get back whatever data. So if this was successful, I know this is going to have an access and a refresh token, which means in here, I can go ahead and set those in a cookie. So right now, what I can do is return a response status of 200 with some JSON. And then in here, I can just have something like success logged in successfully. Because I don't want to send back the access and refresh token values inside of this JSON because I don't want to expose that to the client. I want to have that in a cookie. So before this response right here, this is where I'm going to have that set cookie header, and then that's going to tell the browser to set our cookies. So the way I can do that is with response.setHeader, and then this header is going to be set-cookie like so. And then we're going to be setting two cookies, so I'm going to have an array here. All right, so right now, what I can do is I can even set the cookie right over here. So I can have, let's say, access is equal to the value of the access token, which would be data.access is where I could grab that. And I can have other settings here as well, like httpOnly. And then I can also have, let's say, the secure flag if I want this to only be sent over HTTPS connections. I can have things like max-age, set that to like 1800 if I want 30 minutes. So I could do this, but it's not really the nicest way to go about doing this. It would be nicer to have some sort of function where I can just pass different options and so forth. And there is actually a package that I can install that does this exact thing for me. So I can go into Google right now, look for npm cookie, and this is a nice package that we can use to help us with this process. So all you have to do to install it is npm install cookie. So I'm going to go ahead and grab that. So I'm going to open up my terminal, go into my React client, And then I'm gonna paste in that install and click enter. All right, so that installed that package for me. Now I can go ahead and rerun my React front end. So this package is quite simple. If I actually check out the documentation, so we have two functions that we really use. So we can either parse cookie values. So this will take a string as input. So your cookies are going to be in this sort of format by default. And then you can do cookie.parse. Now we don't really have to use this because in Express we can set up cookie parser. And then that way, inside of Express, we can instead do something like rec.cookie in order to grab the cookie values. So that's a slightly better way. Although you could also do it using this parse function. Then you also have serialize. So this is just a function that will take in 3 parameters. So the first is going to be the name of the cookie, followed by the value of the cookie, and then followed by whatever options you want. So right now what I can do is right here, const cookie is require cookie. And then instead of having this right here, I can do cookie.serialize. And then the first parameter or the first argument is going to be access. That's the name of my cookie. Then the value is going to be data.access because my data, this is where I have this access, which is my access token value. And then finally, gonna have my options, which is going to be an object. Then here I can pass various keys and values. Then in the documentation, it shows you what these things are. So you can have things like domain, encode, expires, and so forth. So one that I want is this httpOnly flag. So I'm gonna go ahead and set that. And then I'm gonna want this to be set to true. And then after that, I'm going to use this max age. So max age, and that is going to be 60 seconds times 30 is going to give me 30 minutes. Because on our backend, we set up the access tokens to last for 30 minutes. So that was right here with the simple JWT setting. So minutes equals 30. So that's why I'm also going to do the same thing here. So that way after 30 minutes, the browser will remove this cookie. It'll be expired. And then you can also set a path optionally, which I suppose I could do. For my path, I'll have /API/. And then you can also have same site. And now the same site property is one that I actually want. So same site, I'm going to be setting to strict. And this will just make it so that these cookies are restricted to only being allowed to be sent on the same origin. So there's no way to get around that. So same site I'll have as strict. And then after that, we have secure. So secure is another good one. And then for this one, I want it to be more dynamic. So I'm going to check my process.env.node environment. And I'm going to see if it's equal to production. If it is, this will result in true. So secure will be true, meaning that this cookie will only get sent along on an HTTPS connection. If our node environment is not production, it'll be false. So in our development environment, we definitely don't want this to be true. So this is the way that I'm going to have it. And then in our env, we also have this right here, which we set to development. So this indeed is going to be false when we're in our development environment. So there we are. So this exact same thing, just to be clear, we could have written as just one string. So access equals access, and then httpOnly, max age 1800. Then we could have our path /API/. We could have our same site strict. And then we would just omit the secure. So we could do this right here, and this function will literally generate something like this for us. And you could even see that if you open up the node modules and look at cookie. And then as you can see, it's a pretty straightforward package. So again, if I go down, we have the serialize function, name, value, options. and then it just creates the string for us. So the string is name equals value as a string. Then it checks, do we have a max age property? If so, go ahead and add on the max age property. Do we have the domain property in our options? If so, go ahead, add it in. Do we have the path? If we do, add it in, and so on and so forth. You can just keep on going down. All right, so that is our first cookie. And then we're gonna have one more, which is going to be our refresh. So the name's going to be refresh, the value is going to be coming from data.refresh, and the main difference is this will last for 1 day. So you can do 60 times 60 times 24, that'll equate to 1 day. Because by default, the refresh token with that simple JWT package will expire after a day. So there we are. Now we have our login functionality set, except for actually this catch part. So that's also something I'm going to go ahead and add in. And actually also having an else part we'll need as well. So almost done with the login functionality here on our Express server. So in this case, if we're not successful, I'm going to return a response.status where I mirror whatever the API response.status was and whatever the data was. Because the data is going to have some sort of errors, and this should be status, not state. There we go. And then in this catch, we're going to have something kind of similar, except we're going to hard code a 500 status code. I'm just going to have a custom error message that just says something went wrong when logging in. So something went wrong on our server in this case, if we ever hit this catch part. All right, so if we hit this else, we're not going to set these cookies as well as this catch part. So there we are. So now we are ready to go back here and create an action creator for logging in. So I'm just going to copy what we have here just to make this process easier. And right below the register, I'll paste this. I'm going to change the name to login. The dispatch type is going to be users/login. And then as parameters, we're going to receive an object that's going to have just the email and password. So we're going to remove the first name, last name. We're going to have thunk API like before. We're going to JSON stringify just the email and the password. And then our endpoint is the one we just set up, API users login. So API users login, there we go. It's going to be on a relative route. So the proxy is going to proxy that to our Express server. It's going to be a post request with these headers passing in our body. And then we're going to see whatever the data was. If we get a 200 status, this was successful, and we'll just return the data. Now the data in this case is simply just this success logged in successfully. So we are going to go ahead and return that in a payload, but I'm not going to be utilizing that data. So I'm not going to be changing any of my initial state using that payload, but I'll still return it anyway. And then that way, if you want to take this app a little further, then you can have some sort of like message state where then you can update that based on the payload of this or this right here. But I'm not going to go ahead and do that. So there we are. We now have our login. So that's all set up. Now the next thing we have to do is edit our extra reducers to add these cases for now our login. So below here, I'll add a case, which is going to be login.pending. And then this will take in state and payload, although I won't be utilizing any payload, so I'll just be using the state. So I'm going to have my arrow function, and this will just update state.loading to be true. I'm also going to have a case for login.fulfilled, where I'm also just going to have state, because again, I'm not using that payload. Otherwise, I could also do the action, but I'm just going to be using the state in this case. So state.loading, if we are successful, we're going to set back to false. State.isAuthenticated is going to be true, and that will be all. And then I'm also going to add a case for login.rejected. I'm going to have state, and just state.loading will be set to false. All right, so we have all these cases, but we still have a slight problem. So right now we just managed to be authenticated, which is great, but we don't have our user data yet. And when I dispatch this login, I do also want to receive my user somehow. So that would be kind of nice if I could go ahead and do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another action creator, which is going to be responsible for receiving my user. And then I can dispatch that action creator inside of this login. So the way that that's going to work is if I'm successful, then in that case, I can destructure dispatch from Thunk API, and then I can dispatch my action creator, which is going to be to get my user. So I still have to create this action creator, but that's the way it's going to work. So I'm going to save what I have here for now. And then the first thing I need to do is now create a route handler in Express, which is going to receive my user. So I'm going to call this me.js. And also another important thing I just remembered, whenever we create a route handler, we do have to open up this index.js, and then we have to do the app.use with the route. So I have to do that for my login, and I also have to do that for my me route. So I'm going to do that by copying down twice. I'm going to do login here. And I'm also going to do me. So we're going to have, whoops, this should be login. So login route is require the login route handler. Me route is requiring the me route, which is just receiving the user. Then I'm going to copy down twice here. Bring this one into here. Bring this one into here. So that we actually have these route handlers set up. So now inside of here, I'm going to do const express is require express. And I'm also going to need this import for the fetch. There we are. And then I'm going to create my route handler. So const router is express.router. Module.exports equals router. And between here, I'm going to do router.get. So I'm going to make this a GET request because we're getting the user. It's going to be /API/users/me. This is going to be an async request response. So in here, we're going to make that API request to our Django backend API, but we also have to parse those cookie values. So in order to parse those cookie values, I have to go into my terminal that's running Express. I'm going to have to do an npm install save cookie-parser. Now, I don't need to do this cookie parser, but it's a much nicer way to parse the cookies. So that's the way I'm going to do it. Then I can restart this. So right now what I have to do is go back into this index.js and then do a const cookie parser equals require cookie-parser. And then right below here, let's say, I can do an app use cookie parser. So just like that. So now that I have this cookie parser, what I can do inside of here is I can destructure my access cookie from rec.cookies. So now that I have this value, I can make my authorized request to get my user. So now what is that authorized request? So inside of my backend, I have the URLs, and I'm going to be hitting API/users/me on the backend. So that's what's going to retrieve my user, because that's going to hit this view right here, where simply I get the user from the request, I serialize it, and I send it back in a response, which is going to be a 200 OK response. So that's the way that we receive our user. So now I can do my try catch. I can do const API response is await fetch. And also because I'm calling this API response inside of my login and me, I'm also going to call it that in the register just to stay more consistent. So I'll do API response here, which is not required, but I think it just makes things more consistent. Anyway, back inside of here, I'm going to be doing a fetch with process env API URL / API users me. And then I believe this was a GET request. Yep, we handled this as a GET request. So I'm going to do method of GET. I'm going to do headers with an accept header of application JSON. And that's all we need. We don't need a content type. We're not passing any JSON data in here. However, there is another header that we need to pass inside of here because this is an authorized request. So I need my authorization header, which is spelled wrong here, authorization. And then in backticks, I can have bear and my access token value, which is this right here from my cookies. And then after that, all I need to do is just mirror back the response. So I can do return response.status, API response.status, so whatever the status code was. If it's a 200, great, that's what we're going to send back. Otherwise, it's some kind of error. And then I can do .json and then grab whatever data comes from this request. So I can do that with the wait API response.json. So if this was successful, this will be our user data. Otherwise, it's going to be some sort of error that we're passing back inside of here. So perhaps we're not authorized. Maybe this access token expired. So then we get this back. We get a 401 unauthorized with some kind of error. That's the data we're going to see in here. This will be a 401 along with that error data. Or if it's successful, this will just be our user being sent back with a 200 OK. So we're just mirroring back whatever our Django backend API sent us. And then inside of the catch, like before, I'm going to hard code a 500 internal server error, along with some JSON data with a custom error message. Something went wrong when trying to retrieve user. So there we are. Now we have a route handler all set up. So now back inside of my features user.js file, now I can go ahead and create this action creator. And I'll do it right above my login. So export, and I don't really need to export it, I don't think. So instead I'm going to do const get user is create async thunk, which is going to be users / me, let's say. And then I'm going to have my asynchronous callback. Now this won't take any arguments, so I'm just going to have an underscore like this to designate that this parameter won't have any value, that it's not going to be passed. And then I'm going to have my thunk API. All right, so now I can do my try catch, or I can do const response is equal to await fetch, which is going to be a relative route to API / users / me. This is on my Express server. We made that route handler a moment ago. And then the cookies should also automatically get sent along in this request, so that we can make that authorized request. And if we don't have a cookie, it's just going to fail. And then as for my options, so method will be get, because that's what we set it up inside of our Express handler. It's a get request. And then for my headers, I'm just going to have an accept header of application JSON, and that's it. We do not have to be authorized to hit this route handler here. This is not the one we have to be authorized for. The one we have to be authorized for is the one on our Django backend API. Now this handler, because Express is managing the cookies and it has access to our access and refresh token by being able to parse the cookies, it can make this authorized request. Whereas here, we can't make that authorized request. We can't put our authorization header here with bear and then our access token. We don't have the access token. We can't access it because it's an HTTP only cookie, which is what we want. We don't want the client to be able to access the value, which is why we have this setup. So if we get a response status of 200, we know this was successful. Otherwise, we know it failed. Oops. So I'm going to get the data. So I'm going to do an await response.json, Gonna get that data and return it as a payload. And then if this failed, instead I'm gonna return thunk API dot reject with value data. And I'm gonna do the exact same thing right here, except this is gonna be error.response.data because we're inside of this catch. We don't have access to data inside of here. So now finally, all we have to do is back inside of our login action creator. We just have to dispatch that get user action creator. So I'm gonna dispatch get user. And just like that, now whenever we're successful, we dispatch get user, and then we return the data, which is gonna be a payload, but we're not utilizing this payload in this case. Now I'm also gonna have to handle the dispatch types that are coming from this get user. So we're gonna have user/me/pending, fulfilled, and rejected. So we're gonna have to go back down into our extra reducers once again, and then add some cases. Now we've already done this a few times, so just to make this process easier, I'll grab these three here for the login, pending, fulfilled, rejected. I'm gonna copy, and I'm gonna paste. I'm gonna change these to be our get user. So we're gonna have get user pending, fulfilled, and rejected. So if we're retrieving our user, I can set this to be true. And then if we get the fulfilled, now we're not gonna be doing the is authenticated true. That's what our login is doing. Instead, we're gonna have state.user is equal to whatever's in our payload. So in this case, we will be utilizing the payload. So I can also bring in action, and I can also even destructure payload from the action if I want. I'm just gonna do action here. And that's gonna be action.payload. So action.payload is gonna be our user data. Because if I go up to that get user action creator, we are returning the data here when we're successful. And our const data is whatever we got back here from this API request. Now what we get back from this API request should be our user. Because here we're making that request to our Django backend API to get our user. So we get that user data and we return it in the response. So we receive that here and we pass that as a payload. So that inside of our fulfilled case for the get user, we should have access to the payload, which is the user. So we can set our user state to be that user data. So hopefully that makes sense. And then this get user rejected, I'm just gonna be setting loading to false. All right, so here we go. We now have this login functionality all set up. So right now, all we have to do is go into our login page and then just bring in that action creator. So it's gonna come from the same file that this reset registered is coming from. So login, I'm gonna bring that in, and then I just have to dispatch that on this on submit, and that will log us in. So dispatch, login, and then I have to just pass in the email and password. Now remember, this is always gonna be one parameter we're passing in here. So you have to pass this as an object. That's when we're passing multiple parameters. So make sure you do this as an object. Then I'm gonna save that. And finally, we can test logging in. Whew, so it's quite a bit. Let's make sure everything's good in our console. So yeah, we still get this little warning, but that's something from React Router DOM. So no worries with that. I'm just gonna do a little refresh here. So let's see what we got. So right now is authenticated false, user null, loading false, registered false. And then I'm also going to open up the application. So we should have our cookies get set here once we log in. So that's what I want to keep an eye on. So there's going to be cookies on localhost 3000. So because we're going to get in the response that set cookie header, that's going to tell the browser, hey, set these cookies. So in the last video, I created a John Doe account. I'm just going to go ahead and reuse this account. And there we are. We get back a refresh and an access token. Then we can also take a look at this Redux Chrome helper thing. So right now we have users login pending when it was pending. So we saw that loader. Then we have users me pending. Then we have users login fulfilled, users me fulfilled. So now inside of our Redux state, we have is authenticated is true, and we have our user data. So first name, last name, and email data is all there for the user. So this worked successfully. Then also if I go into the network tab and I look at this login route, this is the route on Express that did that set cookie header. So we can even see in the response, we get this set cookie header, where then we had access is equal to the value. And then here you can see all of these things here. And then we had another set cookie, which was for refresh equals this, along with all these settings that we set. So that's why the browser actually set these cookies. And then when we sent this request, this went ahead and it sent the cookies along. So here you can see the actual cookie with access equals this value and refresh equals this value. So our cookies automatically got sent along in this request, which is why we were able to parse them on that route handler for retrieving our user on the Express server. All right, so quite a bit was covered in this video. So now we're able to log in, but we're not able to log out yet. So that's gonna be a sort of next step. Also, if I refresh the page, then I won't remain logged in because we don't have any logic for that. So maybe the final thing that I'm gonna do is just implement our logic for logging out, and then I'll put a wrap to this video. So let's go ahead and do that. So how do we log out? Well, to log out, we just want a way to expire those cookies, because if we don't have those cookies, then on our Express route handler, let's say here to retrieve our user, when we go to parse this access, we won't have it. We won't have this access. So we need a way to expire that cookie and have the browser remove it. So that's gonna be the next thing we work on. I'm just gonna minimize some of these things here. All right, so I'm gonna create a new route handler now. I'm gonna call this logout.js. Gonna do my boilerplate like before. Const express is require express. Const router is express.router. Module.exports router, just so that I can export this from here. And then I'm going to create my route handler, which will be router.get, let's say. This will be /API/users/logout. That's a pretty reasonable route handler for this. Gonna have my rec and res. So here I don't need to do anything asynchronous with JSON web tokens. There's no like logging out really on the server unless you do the token blacklisting. So logging out in this case is just expiring those cookies. So those cookies are gonna get sent along in this request, but I don't really care too much about them. All I really care about is setting the access and refresh cookies, setting them to be empty with an expiry date that's in the past, and then just pass them along in a set cookie header. So the browser is going to see that, and then it's just going to expire those cookies. So that's the way that works. So really I just have to do response.set header. And then here, I'm going to have the set cookie header like before, because I'm setting a cookie. There's going to be 2 cookies. Now again, I can just literally have the string here. I can do access equals empty, :/, and then followed by all of my settings. And then the one that's more important is the expires, where we want it to be some sort of value in the past. So I'm going to bring in that cookie library because it's going to help us with this whole process. So cookie is coming from cookie. And then inside of here, I can do cookie.serialize. So the name is going to be access, the exact same as our cookie we have already, which is set. We're just going to set it to be an empty string. And then we're going to set some options. So I'm going to go to my login. I'm just going to grab the options I have here. I'm just going to plop them into here so I don't have to retype all of them. And then the only one that's going to be different is this max age, because I'm not setting a max age right now. Instead, I need this to be some sort of value in the past. And there's a convenient way to do that because we don't just have access to max age, we also have access to expires, which is another property. And then here I can just do new date 0. Now, I don't remember exactly what date new date 0 returns, although it is some date far in the past. So this will work out. And then we just have to do the same sort of thing for the refresh token as well. So I'm just going to copy this, comma, and paste. And then I'm going to have refresh, which is also going to be empty. It's going to have all these settings here. The important one is the expires as new date 0, which is going to expire the cookie. And now we just have to send a response with this header, and that's going to get rid of those cookies in the browser for us. So now I can just return a response dot status of 200 with some JSON data, which is just going to be success, logged out successfully, something like that. So there we are. So with that, we now have logic to log out on our Express server. And like before, we have to open up this index. Just make sure that we go ahead and set up this route handler. So below here, I'll do logout route is equal to routes auth logout is where that's coming from. And then I'm just going to do an app.use with the logout route. So there we are. Our Express server's all ready to go. So now inside of our client, I'm going to open up my features user, and let's create this logout action creator. So maybe below the login, I can also just copy this and paste. This will be logout. The dispatch type will be users logout. And then this is not going to take any parameters. So I'm also going to be using that underscore, which in JavaScript just signifies this parameter isn't going to really be passed. Not going to be doing any JSON stringifying, so we're going to remove that. And then here, going to be sending a request off to my API users logout route on my Express server, which is going to be a GET request. Because it's a GET request, not going to have a content type header, not going to have a body. So just like this, I can grab the data. I won't be utilizing the data like I've mentioned with some of my other action creators, although I'll still have it here and send it back inside of the payload. Then I don't need this. But I do want to check if response status is 200, because that means it's successful, and I'll just return the data in a payload. And then again, just so in case you forgot, that data is literally just this success logged out successfully, which you can make use of, or you don't have to. So if you add alerts, that would be a good place to use it. And then if this fails for whatever reason, I'll just do this reject with value in both of these cases. Although nothing should really go wrong in this sort of route handler, it's a quite straightforward one. We just have where we're setting this set cookie header and just returning a response. That's it. Very simple. And then from there, we just have to add our cases and then utilize this action creator inside of our nav bar. So let's add those cases real quick. So to make this easier, I'll just copy these guys here, paste them right below here. And then when we're pending, so I also have to change these to be logout.pending fulfilled and rejected. So if we're pending, I'll just set state.loading to true in case if I want to use any sort of loader when I click that logout button. In my case, I won't, but you could always do that. And then when we're fulfilled, we'll just be setting loading to false. And I won't have any sort of payload or anything that I'm utilizing, so I'll just be removing that. And then there is something important we have to do, which is this right here. Is authenticated should be false, and our user should be null. So those are two things we're going to be doing. So back inside of this fulfilled, state.isAuthenticated will be false, state.user will be set back to null. This way we are back to having a sort of logged out state. And then in the rejected case, I'll just set state.loading to false. And then the isAuthenticated in a user, I'll just have untouched if this fails, which it most likely shouldn't ever. So here we are. Now let's open up our components navbar. And let's go ahead and bring in that action creator. Also, I'm going to need use dispatch in here so I can dispatch that action creator. I'm going to import logout from features user. Const dispatch is use dispatch. And then on this anchor tag, I can set an on-click handler. So I'm just going to have an arrow function like this, which does a dispatch of logout. So there we are. So now when I click this, I should get logged out. So let's go ahead and see that in action. So it looks like I'm going to have to re-log in because this got refreshed after some changes I made. So no problem, johndoe@gmail.com with my password. There we are. So now I have the home, dashboard, and the logout button. So now I'm logged in, and I can even look at my state here. I'm currently logged in, and here's my user data. So now when I click this logout, let's see what happens. Also, I think it might be nice to open up, say, my network tab. And then I'm going to go ahead, click on this logout. And here, this actually got a 500 internal server error. Okay, so we got a 500 internal server error because cookie.serializer is not a function. So I have to actually go into my logout, and I have to change this to be cookie.serialize, not serializer. So that was my bad. This is the name of that function. So now with that, we can go ahead and retry this now. So logout, and there we go. This time it succeeded. So perfect. And now you can see inside of the response headers, we have a set cookie header. And in this case, access is equal to nothing. And then we also have this right here, which is that expires property. So this is actually that date. So January 1st, 1970. So that is well in the past. Therefore, this cookie is well expired and the browser will remove it. Same with the refresh token here, which is inside of our cookies. The browser will also remove that one when we do this logout, which is why now, if I open up this developer tool thing, I can see is authenticated is now false, user is null. And then we can also see we got our users logout pending. We also got the logout rejected when we ended up failing because I did that little typo. So at least you can see that it does work. And then I also see users logout pending again, and then the fulfilled when I actually made that change. So actually that was kind of nice. I made that typo. That way you can actually see the rejected case triggered as well. And then with our cookies, we no longer have anything inside of our cookies. So there we are. Now we have login and logout functionality. The only thing we have left is to do this dashboard. So we have to actually display the user data inside of here. And also when I refresh, we need to remain logged in. So I'm going to save that for a final video. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to leave this video a nice big like, so that way the YouTube algorithm can go ahead and recommend this video to others who are interested in this sort of thing. Also hit that subscribe button if you want to see more of this sort of content. And also you can hit that notification bell if you want more notifications in your life. And other than that, I will see you guys in the next video.